for the future, thinking about the future. But yeah, technical depth. This chapter I read this morning, and it was very very good. And started with talking about the technical depth as a platform team, like all the chapters from the point of view of a platform team. But typically, I have seen like platform engineers kind of like the new DevOps and people putting it into here, but the technical depth, uh, personally, I've seen it from the app development, right? The writing Java, writing. Yes, I told myself like I come from the Java world. Once in there, like which libraries do I depend on? Like at the end of the day, with a lot of
Nothing
like I
to be
think yeah, Java was
ashamed
the
of,
first
don't
one that you
worry.
did because I mean, with so many app servers and so many libraries and so many vendors back in the days, was like you wrote a little bit of like object-oriented classes and methods, right? And then everything else was just magic. The web server, the caching of the database, the accessing the database, accessing another service through messaging, like just magic, right? Two app servers communicating through messages. And that's all was technical depth at the end of the day, right? You're depending on all these things that you don't have control over, and hope that nothing changed and my applications continue to work and I can work on the next feature. But this perspective is from the platform perspective, and I think Hilary did a great job of like illustrating the core or starting with questions like of technical depth. I don't know if Hilary wants to start with the questions and then documenting those questions. I think you put that at later in the chapter, but I think there's also benefit of putting mentioning at the beginning that documenting these questions.
Yeah, I think I talked about the documentation aspect when I talked about the architecture decision records, ADRs.
Yep.
Um, yeah, this is the one for me. This is like my personal checklist of like assessments. Um, this goes back to kind of um, several years ago. I was like brand new at Red Hat, and I was asked to assess because there was a disagreement between other technical leads. I was asked to assess what we were going to do because there was a forced deprecation, and we needed to replace that component. Um, and you know, I think if there hadn't been a forcing function, they probably would have kept it, but there was. So there were some technical leaders that just absolutely could not agree on what the replacement needed to be. Really strong opinions on both sides. So I was asked, like, "Hey, you're new, you're fresh, you have no skin in this game. Can you please go in and figure this out?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" Um, and so as I'm trying to do an assessment of these things that on the surface sounded the same, I had to kind of figure out like what's the differentiating pieces. And so this is essentially the same set of questions that I ended up asking, and I went and I interviewed the technical leads who had identified solutions they were passionate about. These questions. Then I'd asked similar version of these questions as the user interview for the people that were supposed to be using the component that the platform was implementing, right? The actual people who had to use it. So this is representing kind of like thinking back to that, and then ultimately like the decision that we took was based on the answers to these questions. And so like for example, um when we got into like what is necessary to maintain it, and does the team have the skills, one of them was a Ruby based solution, like a Ruby on Rails actually. And I was like, dude, nobody here knows Ruby. Why is this? Why are we feeling so strongly about this when nobody here knows Ruby? Like, are we going to have the ability to like the time to upskill, the ability to upskill with everybody's like additional like competing priorities? Um, and kind of calling that out was one of the things that really changed the mind of one of the strong opinions in the room towards the other solution, and then identifying that it actually still met all the other requirements was why we finally went with the solution that was done in Python, and everybody knew Python.
There was a question. Let me see.
No, sorry. I was just putting
Oh,
links
okay.
and then fixing my references.
So
Sorry.
the Python the Ruby on Rails, it was more of a question of like, if there's something that is blocking us, how are we going to get out of this mess kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And
Um,
there were actually problems with it. And there were some additional concerns, which were like, hey, this is an open source project, but there doesn't have maintainers anymore, and it doesn't work out of the box. So we'd have to go change it and make it work. And like there were a bunch of other things where I ultimately, like, not to criticize that person, was very confused why they felt so passionately for it. Um, but yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, if there is a critical bug and it's an open source project, right? And so we're saying, whatever we do, if it's open source, then we always, as a practice, get a relationship with the upstream maintainers so that if there's a bug that we
yeah,
need, we can fix it and you know, demonstrate that we'll be there to handle our pull requests and be responsible for whatever we add to the project. And that was also when we found that there was no really active upstream, was when we started trying to query and we weren't getting responses. And then on the other project where there were also some bugs that would have impacted us, we were getting responses and we were getting engagement. And so like those were really big differences between the two things as well, just aside from the language problem.
yeah, I've seen that before. I've seen like two aspects of that, like in Kubernetes land, and is Kubernetes is massively, like, from the things that I see, massively adopted by organizations that have zero Go development skills, right? I don't know if people have that relationship, but then they're going to use all these controllers and operators that are Go-based controllers, and usually that's the question. And that's like, well, if there's something wrong with cert manager, what do we do? How do we patch it? Is it Go? Nobody knows Go here. Everybody's a business, right? Everybody is on the business side, and only like the first two people assigned to build a platform, right? Those are like, well, we know Java. I guess we need to learn Go because all these controllers are built in Go. But the other alternative is what you said, right? Align yourself with the maintainers and the project, and being a maintainer. um and some people don't realize this, like, you can talk to maintainers, you can schedule a 15-minute meeting for your organization. And me, as a maintainer, I was a maintainer for OpenWhisk, Apache, Knative, Kubernetes. We love end users. You don't have to be an expert on the software, but we love end users to come and say, we're thinking about using your thing, but it doesn't do this. We don't know how to do that. And then in the future, we may need non-future requirements, like, something about security, something about observability. It doesn't does it can it work with the thing that we already use for the last 10 years on observability, right? Usually those are the questions. Um, and that maintainer team can say, well, we have it on the plan, we can add it to the plan, or we can ask the community, or we can teach you, or we can show you where the endpoints or the extensions, things that you can write or integrate. And you don't have to do it in Go, you can do it in APIs, right? um, so those are the typical things that I've seen on that. So what was your like, some experience of those interviews? Did you have some bias? Let's talk about bias. Like, if you were replacing something that is deprecated, and maybe it did good for the last 5 years. 5 years in tech is a huge amount of time, but it's deprecated. Did you encounter any bias of saying, like, we're not going to trust that organization anymore because now the new version, they may deprecate it in 5 years, and we want to something that can last 10 years? And then you say, well, is there any bias when taking those type of decisions or replacing something, saying, I'm going to trust the technology, I'm going to trust the people behind it?
Yeah, that was really one of the concerns of not just the team that was going to have to implement the new aspect of the platform, but the users, because they were going to have to change. They were going to have to change. It was for logging and exception tracking, and so they were going to have to change code aspects, which would require some refactoring in order to comply with whatever either direction we were going in. So they wanted to have a reasonable degree of confidence, exactly like you said, like, well, what we've been using has just been working for years. We would like what replaces it to just work for years, right?
Yeah.
um I will say where we got lucky in that conversation was when I asked them, well, how much of the data that is stored there do you need to retain or migrate? The answer was none. This was all being used very in early development and staging and testing environments. and it wasn't the production logging system. So they were like, we're fine to lose the logging and exception tracking, error and exception tracking on these lower environments. Like we really don't need. We already only have a few days worth of data retention anyway. We really don't need any of it migrated. That's fine. We'll just do a cut. So that was where we got really lucky. But the trade-off of that was they wanted to make sure that cutover would be as smooth and easy as possible for them, and that there was a good plan around that, and that they knew that what they were doing, the effort they were putting into that cutover was going to be lasting.
So this was a situation where your maybe SRE platform team didn't have an option of like an abstraction of saying we're going to switch to some other system, but the end users are not impacted. This was like, oh my God, we have to coordinate with the end users because they're tied into this API. And any thoughts about like, well, this time around, are we going to add an abstraction as a platform team, or kind of like, what's the debate there?
Yeah, so trying to add in, I mean, we would essentially had to try and create something like an API shim and like a data transformation pipeline, and that's just a lot to do. And there was a time constraint. So when you're talking to like those types of things of like, okay, what could we normalize this? Could we do whatever? And that also starts becoming like you're building middleware at that point. That is an application development. That's not. I wouldn't encourage that on a platform team most of the time, because it's not really what I would say. Is if you can avoid it, it's not what I would put in a platform. I've definitely had to work on platforms where we've had to do that middleware layer and the data transformations and so forth. We're all on the table, and the overhead of not just building, designing it, but maintaining it and expanding it, that's its own product at that point. Not even project, because it never ends. That's its own product at that point. So like I would really discourage that from a sustainable amount of technical debt situation. And so since there was already stuff in the application code to break and send error and exception handling to an endpoint, having them refactor that a bit, that was the lowest level of effort, and then the dev teams were willing to do that because they understood the situation.
I think you mentioned it later on ROI, right? So that was like the thing that you wrote in the ROI, like we can build something that is ideal, right? And then give everybody a new library to use, and then they'll be abstracted for eternity.
Yeah.
But then we're building a new system, we're building a product of like observability, or actually you can say, actually we talked to them and they say we're okay with the refactoring and the amount is not that much and the ROI is like very low, and we need this fast, right? We need to prove it fast to have confidence, right? Like the confident aspect, because you were saying that some architects couldn't agree. So I guess your mission was gaining confidence because they didn't have it. Like when you don't agree on something, it's because of confidence, not because one person is right or wrong. It's just the confidence based on the data, and then I think you later talk about the data.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, like I said, I interviewed for that particular situation, not just the end users who were, their applications were impacted, but I interviewed the technical stakeholders, right? The two technical leads who had a high degree of like passion for the direction, and then also the actual like platform engineers who were going to have to like do the long-term maintenance. And so I had my team, which was my team was brought in to kind of like help resolve this conflict that was existing in another team. So we said, okay, we're going to take this on. And we actually ended up splitting the difference. So my team took on the like upstream relationship and bug patching and CVE patching and all that other stuff aspect of the component, and the existing platform team they took on like the hosting and the runtime. So like if they needed to scale, then they were in charge of scaling and so on and so forth. So we did initial profiling, and then they took over production operations, and then we keep the software, that middleware layer, like secure and compliant and up to date. And we did submit features and bug fixes to the upstream. That upstream community was so excited to have Red Hat participating. They were so kind and so welcoming to our engineers. And I still get automatic notifications about our like Dependabot updates and everything on that repository, even though I'm not on that team anymore. So the project is 4.5 years later, it's still there. So I think we made a good choice in that it's been fairly enduring.
But in your case, you had folks from the platform team, like, or maybe the company organization, like join and contribute, like PRs and involve.
Yeah. So we needed a few feature enhancements and bug fixes in the upstream. So the engineer I asked to do the proof of concept for that upstream, when he was doing that proof of concept, he identified those gaps and he proactively reached out to the maintainers on that project and said, "Hey, here's who I am. Here's why I'm contacting you. Here's the situation. What's your comfort level with
Yeah,
receiving pull requests from us?" Or these features that we were thinking of, and like so he just took the initiative. I mean, he's a senior engineer, very mature,
yeah.
and so he took the initiative to do that. And then later, some of the junior engineers joined him in the actual like execution of those things that he had negotiated and scoped and worked out with the upstream. So again, just a really fantastic upstream community. That's called a glitch tip, by the way, and I think they're still fairly active.
What's the name of the project? Glitch.
Glitch tip.
Oh, really? Okay, very good. Um, so and a little bit about um the skills, or like where, when you were doing this evaluation to get everybody on alignment, on the stakeholders on alignment, did you, how did you document it, all this? Do you document it in a wiki, in a doc, or presentation mode, of like how, as you were getting data, doing the interviews to finalize the conclusion, and then put it and basically offer the options, right, to the people that want alignment, right?
Yeah, so what I did is I interviewed the stakeholders as individuals, to kind of like get the most honest answer from each person. So for the application teams, I interviewed their team leads, their technical leads. Um, so I had a preset list of questions and I sent that to them ahead of time so that if they didn't know, they could, get information. And then I recorded the interviews as well so that I had really accurate notes on things as we were going through the questions. So I had those recorded interviews. I had a list of questions, um, and essentially interviews that the engineers I had doing proofs of concepts needed to answer. Basically, like, hey, figure out if this does these things, and note any additional issues or gaps or something in like this little like I think we made like a little, just like, it was like a Google Doc chart. There wasn't anything like already made when I joined, like a template around this or anything like that. Now we
Yeah,
have that.
that's what I'm asking.
But
Yeah,
at the time we didn't have anything. So I kind of had to really develop something. And then I also, like I said, I went in and I had one-on-one interviews with platform engineers. Um, and so it was actually another SRE team, but they also had a platform, an IDP that they had built. And I was on a different SRE team, and we were like more closely embedded with that engineering team. So we didn't have our own platform. So that was kind of an interesting thing, is that we were two different styles of SRE. Anyway, so I interviewed a couple of the platform engineering like team, just like not even the technical lead that was like really passionate, but like the stakeholders, the people who would be doing the implementation. I interviewed them about why, if they had a particular like preference and what that was and why that was. And skill set and language was one of the things that we don't know Ruby was one of the things that had come up, and it was like, well, my team didn't know Ruby either, so we weren't going to be helpful there. So that ended up being like a very big point of like pushback. Um, and so when I gathered all that information and I did a side by side comparison of like the end user reactions to the different options and what they seen, and the platform team, a confidence in their ability to support it 24/7, and what that would mean, and like what we were actually trying to solve. So like one of the things I sat down each of the technical leads individually on, I was like, what are we solving for? What is the outcome that we're trying to find here? And I got just that. And I said, I would like completely unbiased of like technologies or whatever. I want you to just tell me what we're solving for. And so when I got a concise and agreed upon problem statement, then I was able to illustrate a technical recommendation and why it was my technical recommendation. And that was ultimately the way that it went, because when everything was laid out that way, the person who had felt very strongly for the other system was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I understand.
yeah. And the reason I ask, and I put Sevi on the spot, Sevi, you are a lead in a platform team, and how important it is, the communication skills in this aspect. That's what I was looking for. So Sevi, when you interview or you get new people, or like It's not
Yeah.
about the technical aspect, right? How, because we're talking about technical depth, and technical depth is not just the technical. I think it's more of the communication skills. Like Hillary said, she looked
Yeah.
for another team, another SRE team, like, and that's the typical question that goes into a doc. Like I work in Amazon, and we're doc driven, so everything is a doc, and it's actually like this type of questions, and then just paragraph answering the questions, and then reading it. And Sevi, in
Hmm.
your organization, do you have those type of folks that have done similar work about communication skill, alignment with documentation or interviews, or looking in the company, like large company like booking.com is a large company, like asking like, are we the first ones to implement observability right in booking.com, or does another team have done it before,
It's
or another
incredibly
team that just did
important.
the
Yeah.
evaluation last week?
Yeah, it's incredibly important, not just in just the size matters, obviously, even in a small company, that would be very important. But when the scale gets bigger and bigger, the amount of the information that spreads, I mean, for example, we have lots of internal tooling APIs, and these are constantly changing, and they're also creating technical debt across the organization as well, because you have to respond this change, and you have to decide when to respond to this change depending on your situation. Sometimes these changes come in programs, like, okay, we have a 2-year program to migrate to this platform, or to decommission this product. So the way you communicate this with your users as a platform, also platform owners, how they communicate these problems with each other is crucial. It just sometimes, not in this company I've seen it, but like sometimes there's just one person very hard to talk to that needs to explain one library is going to be deprecated, and or like you're migrating to, I don't know, GitLab on-prem to GitLab SaaS, and uh, libraries you're depending on will need to
Yes.
use the proxies, and you have to fix the proxies, etc., etc. So when you can't get an answer from this, it might block you for 2-3 weeks, I don't know, until you are certain. So yeah, it is crucial, because as platform owners, you are highly depending on each other, uh, and also you should be able to communicate this properly with your users. So I don't see it too different from any software engineering position, to be honest. Yes, you might have star developers, and if they can't actually function in a team that can't explain problems to other people, they might not function well, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's a skill that is very important. And in DevOps, if you're working for a role in DevOps, there might be weeks that you're not writing any code, any Go code, any YAML
Yeah,
code, any pipeline code, and what you're doing is helping the organization, like Hilary did, was go and find alignment on what will be the solution going forward. And also, Sebi brought interesting point. I don't know if some others have, maybe Andreas have points of like, um, in small organizations you may have one platform team, but in large enterprises, right, you may work for a large enterprise,
yeah,
they might have a lot of like mini or a lot of platform teams that are doing um, IT work, right, for different business units. I went to a large bank the other way, and they have hundreds of line of business, and they kept calling them, called them app teams, and they kept telling me line of business. I'm app team. Actually the
yeah,
same thing. And they actually have IT folks. I have IT folks that help that team. As not just application development, that line of business actually have folks that deal with like, what is the retention aspects of certain data, where's the data should be flow through, which region this app should not be in. um, and that's not writing code. Those are making sure that apps are meeting the requirements, and either requirements of the business or requirements that you're like outside regulations, right, to work
yeah.
in a business area. and
Also,
communication is
it's
key.
really important to be able to document your stuff, to keep your documents updated. Your CLI tooling should be intuitive. You have to pay attention. All these interfaces you provide to your users and the other teams that you are supporting. So, uh, yeah, I mean, quite, I was happily surprised to see the amount of documentation at Booking. It just was immense. Yeah,
and
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 that documentation
now,
was written a long time ago, and I think with AI, right, and RAG
yes,
and with
now you make
LLMs,
more
like
sense of it. Yes,
documentation is the fuel, gasoline, I would say, of
exactly.
2025, 2026. The more data that you have, right, the more context that you're going to have, but also like updated data, like accurate data. Sometimes seen organizations that say like they find the wiki and they find the I think somebody was writing a backstage app that it was to help them find the correct wiki pages, because they have so
Yeah,
many wiki pages from long,
it's
long,
a
long
common
time ago
problem.
that they
Yeah.
were not finding the right one for developing the new patterns, it'd be like Cubase or microservices, and they were not finding that and finding that information. So
Yeah, and
uh,
in large organizations, you might also end up paying some other team's technical debt to unblock yourselves and people, those around you. Like you're contributing to the upstream, but not like that. If you just happen to see a problem, you might just ask, okay, are you guys okay if we try to fix this? We feel like we have an idea, and you can just implement and solve things in one go for others as well. That might be in their tech debt that they will not be able to get to for a while. So yeah,
oh,
it's
that's interesting,
important.
man.
Yeah,
Hey, Larry,
yeah.
have you seen that happening maybe in your
We've had
organization?
this in the
Or
Oh
Red
yeah.
Hat
past.
saying, we can use your stuff, but we need it to work this way.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's cheaper or better to use your thing that you're maintaining, right? Than or maybe collaborating on maintaining it. Like
Yeah, absolutely. That's you know, working on a data visualization tool, um, and there was some back and forth on how we were going to do it, and so on and so forth. And it was kind of a point of going to a couple teams, and we actually went to a couple different teams and said, okay, how do we get out of building something new when there's already 2 to 3 teams that have already done this? How can we leverage what you're doing? What would that look like? What would the agreement need to be between our groups? What would you need from us to be good citizens of what you've built, like good citizens of the platform, or of the platform capability? And so narrowing down and actually getting a path forward there by aligning with one of the groups, because it was just a little bit um, more sustainable for my team to align to what they were doing versus the other team, although the other team technically their platform had a little bit more in the way of capabilities. But again, this was a decision we took about technical debt. What could the team that was working on this maintain? Like what was reasonable for them, and what actually met the user needs? Like what problems were we really trying to solve? So um
so this goes along
yeah.
with the section of the chapters of buy versus build versus buy. What say we were saying, like you're buying internally, like you're buying, right? You're not building something um of the saying of like not invented here, which some things, because they want the control over their destiny, right? They want to build it and not buy it. But buy it also applies to internally, right? You're not paying cash to another team, but you're buying their solution, and then going the same workflow of the questions here, right? Apply, like if it doesn't meet the requirements, then you can ask them, can we customize it, right?
Yeah.
As Sebi was saying, can we send a pull request? um, and and change it, and also co-maintain it, since it's the same organization. Usually the other team will ask you, well, if you want to change it, we have enough bandwidth to support the current version, we don't have bandwidth to support a new version. Usually that's because they don't know what the new version will look like. But then the evaluation is to happen from the consumer side of point of view on if they're going to customize it and buy it. But this also applies to, you mentioned it on buying a solution like from a vendor, right? From a vendor or cloud provider, or doing your own. I think you mentioned open source. Um, but one thing that comes up a lot is that we can afford it, right? I think this is a hole where people like fall very quickly on, because usually nobody has extra budget for the next year, right? You're always planning with with a budget of extra year. You're already burning the this year's budget in enterprise side, right? I'm not saying startup. But sometimes people say, "Can we afford it?" And that's like they spend weeks, right? And that's also documentation, like say was saying, communication skills, documenting, saying like, "Well, how much it would cost, right, at the scale that we needed." And I think you mentioned in the previous one the over engineering, where those numbers that you plug in into the cost, saying, oh, we have to maintain it for 10 years, or the data, I think it was more observability, like data retention and fidelity of the data retention. Like in observability, you can retain it at high fidelity or low fidelity, right? And people may not know that domain and say, well, we cannot afford it. But we can afford like 3-4 engineers to implement our own solution. Like, but if somebody comes along and say, well, it could cost you like half of an engineer to pay for the solution than having like 3 or 4 folks trying to make an open source project work for you and then operate it. You have any thoughts on that, or use cases you have come up with that?
Yeah. It's definitely one of those things where what I see a lot is sometimes people ask the question like, okay, so what does this look at like at a scale of, 10,000 apps? It's like, well, our current scale is 50. So why are we solving for the problem we don't yet have? When we're in the realm of approaching 10,000, we probably need to redo more than this one particular decision. And so actually like separating things out into like, what problems do we have today? And I mentioned this up above, right? What do we have today as our problems? What problems don't we have today, or maybe do we not have yet? And what problems do we think we may never have, right? You can kind of do this and do this like kind of like this crawl, walk, run. And so you may decide to buy something and then also have a point of time at which you know you're going to retire it because of scalability, for example. But that might still be worth it for the short-term gains you have from being able to move more quickly for the situation you're in. And then maybe you do have somebody assigned to working on the planning and execution of that future proofing and identifying your rate of growth. But if you're asking, well, how does this scale to 10,000 and you don't have any knowledge or like reason to believe that your rate of growth is going to get you to 10,000 apps in a year, 2 years, 3 years, that's not solving the right problem.
That's true. And Luke mentions the AI aspect, and a lot of people are going through that today, right? Do I build my own AI, or do I buy my own AI, right? Do I run inference in Kubernetes and nodes, or just use an API? And I think you mentioned the aspect of like buy in the short term, right? Just buy now because you're not that big, so you can quickly grow the business, right? And if you grow the business, that's a good problem to have. If you have you have a lot of users and you have more users, you get to 10,000 users, you have 50 today. That's a good problem, right? Because you were able to get there with the buy, and then you have funding to switch to a different solution, right? That might not be that, buy a different one, or build a new one if you need to build it, if you cannot grow at that rate. But yeah, a lot of people ask
Trying to
this.
build something that scales all the way from like, the size of an ant to the size of an elephant is a very non-trivial problem. So if you build the right things in the right places, like I said, have a deprecation path and plan and so on, I would say just, go between two different solutions versus try to build one gargantuan one that solves for everything. Is probably going to be more sustainable.
I
What
agree.
what would be a good way to assess an open source tool in our, uh, chain of tooling, let's say, like maintenance readiness, or yeah. Is it like okay, when I decide to pick up this tool, it should be, I don't know, a CNCF graduate, or it should have this many maintainers, or it should have this number of pull requests, or they should accept this many pull requests from different sources, etc., etc. Like, what's a good way to decide on an open source tool?
So I think that, the example here kind of shows just a very high level on that. And then so I talk about like the criticality of team buy-in. So you can have
Uh-huh.
two incredibly mature open source tools. Apache Airflow and Argo
Mhm.
Workflows are very
Right.
like, I would say, equally mature
Oh
open
yeah, this
source sets
example,
of
yeah, yeah.
tools, right? So at this point now you're really looking at like, okay, if they're equally mature, they do nearly the same thing. And this is, I had to compare these two things for data transformation pipelines in the past myself. Um, so then it's like this is where we get into the criticality of team buy-in. Like, you're not going to make everybody happy. This is true of the people who are using the platform. This is true of the people who are building the platform. Um, if you've managed to make everybody 100% happy 100% of the time, I would like to know how you've managed that, because I've never seen that once in my career. But so
Consensus shouldn't be expected, in my opinion, but everyone's ideas or voices should be heard. That's
yeah, and
different
as I
than
talk about that, like,
consensus. Yeah.
yeah, 100% consensus is probably impossible. At a
Yeah.
certain point, you're going to need to disagree and commit. But you know, if you can get at least a majority consensus, like, you're going to have a like less risk of burnout, because when people are feeling, and I've seen this, when people are feeling like they have to implement something and they really don't believe in it, they really truly feel that it is the wrong way to go, they are not going to stick around. Like, you will lose that talent. They may do a
Yeah.
very half-hearted job. They may not do their best. They may accidentally introduce additional bugs or issues, and not even intentionally. Like, I've never seen anybody intentionally sabotage it, but I have definitely seen like the wind out of their sails result in them making more mistakes, because it's just such a mental slog for them to do the thing that they really, really, really feel passionately is wrong. Um,
It's such a
so
pain, actually, if you're in that position.
yeah, it's horrible. I've been in that position. I've been on both sides of that position, and
Yeah.
none of it feels good. It doesn't feel good to
Definitely
keep
deserves
forcing.
some empathy if that person is just having to do it. Like,
No, yeah. It doesn't feel good to be the person saying, "I'm sorry, I know you don't like it, but we just need to disagree and commit. We gotta just do it. This is the way we're going." That sucks. Been there, done that, hate it. And I've been on the other end of it where it's just, I've been told, "Well, we're disagreeing and committing, and this is the way we're going, and we expect you to do it." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. This sucks. I hate it." Like, I've been in both seats. They both are horrible.
yep.
And this is when you have like a good solution that you have seen companies being successful, like Apache Airflow, and people have been successful and they use it for years. Our workflows is successful, so you're looking for like what's best for our team, right? Or what is
Mhm.
the best one that our team will be either faster adopting, and you mentioned also upskilling, right? And I'll give you one example. Like, for example, you pick Argo workflows, but the company had never used Kubernetes, never installed Kubernetes, doesn't know what Kubernetes is, doesn't know what a YAML is, right? And then you tell them like, well, the only thing that you need to do to start Argo workflows is install Kubernetes. Like, that's a big, like, that should be an indicator that should not be a good tool. Uh, uh, Even if there's someone in the back saying, "Whoa, that's a good thing because then we get to use Kubernetes." Like, no, like, no, use people use Kubernetes because they need to use Kubernetes, not you that want to use Kubernetes, right? But it's asking like doing POCs and then showing people like what it would take, short POCs about those technologies. But some aspects are like very very known, and then there's the opposite, right? There's only people that know Kubernetes. They're only done have joined an IT organization for the last 3 to 5 years, and the only thing that they know is about running a compute job. It's just Kubernetes pod, right? And how to secure it, they know it. How to get logs out of it, they know it. How to add storage, they know it. How to segregate users, they know it. How to do RBAC, they know it. Like, maybe the Argo workflows is something that they can just add on top of that knowledge, right? That they just like orchestrating jobs. And I think I met someone in KubeCon that they told me like, Argo workflows was difficult for them to adopt. But once they discover a library called Hera, Hera, that is an Python abstraction on top Argo workflows, then they start like running like super fast because they stop creating YAMLs and Helm templates and all these like YAML for Argo workflows. They start like writing all this logic about map reduce, parallel work, data scientists just in Python. And that solved the issue. So sometimes doing a POC or asking the community about the use case may help you like document which tool to use. And like to your Hillary and Savi was saying, um, documenting this in a way that makes sense. And coming back to the I think you mentioned it through the chapter, looking at the time, the questions that you ask, it's a good thing to, for the questions are very very good to have. um like you say, hey, what do we need this, how long does it take, how long do we need it to, how can we automate it. um Actually starting with this aspect of documentation, like writing this in a document, like put the question and then answer for someone that doesn't know much about the technology behind it, right? Just as a business of like enough that is comprehensive, and answering these questions over and over into a and then these are kind of like, frankly, that you mentioned something about the organization didn't have a template. Did you end up with a template? We have a template where I work with. It's a frequently asked questions for any product that we do in where I work, and these are the same questions. That doesn't matter which product we're building. It's the same type of questions. Like this, similar to this of like, who is the end user? How do we need it? How do we cost it? How do we fund it? How do we price it? How people going to use it? How they going to compare it to others? And such. So documenting in this way, I think it's very useful for people to get aspect of like the trade-offs of the technical depth.
Yeah, and we definitely have. I've seen it at other organizations and at my current employer, similar types of questionnaires, checklists, whatever you want to call it, just
Yep.
scorecards.
Yep.
You know, it's essentially is all just documentation, kind of assessing these same things. And we have them for internal projects that would never see a customer, and we have them for external projects that would hopefully see a customer. And I think it's just really important to just the idea of, and we talk about it a lot in the book as a whole, but I think I really tried to say it without saying it again in this chapter of like building, like having a purpose, right? The front, like first question is always like, what problem are we solving? Why are we doing this? What are we gaining here?
Yeah.
And so, wow, it's going to sound bad. I completely forgot about the section on platform composability. Past Hillary was so smart. Current Hillary is in
Yeah,
downtown Boston.
every section has those questions.
What
But
Hillary
that's
was
why I go
smart?
back
Come
to the questions, because every section has these questions that you keep asking, right? So I think the best way to answer things is like when somebody's reading your document, right? They're trying to answer these questions. Like they probably will have these questions of like,
Yeah.
And as more business high level gets, they will be asking you more questions about like funding, like how many people do we need to build this, how many people we need to support this, who in the rest organization are going to use this. And but the first one is the like, why are we building this? Do we need it? Buy versus build is one that comes up a lot. So you want to say something? Sorry.
I think, yeah, just really the closing thought here is I think what I see a lot of times is an oversimplified problem statement. It's really easy to get like a new requirement in that sounds very simple on its surface, and decomposing those into all the little bits and bobs and pieces that go into achieving that requirement or meeting that requirement, right? That's, I think, really what I'm trying to get at here, with with this chapter, is helping people to understand taking a concept and breaking it down into all of the things that are going to go into that execution, because it's not as simple as, oh, well, we'll just build a Kubernetes cluster and install Argo workflows. I mean, it might be if you've got like 5 million Kubernetes experts and 10 Argo workflows experts and everybody knows YAML and everything,
Yeah.
right? But it's realistically probably not that simple. not even, it's not that simple in the enterprise. It's not that simple in a startup. I've never seen any organization where the decision is always just that simple. I was asked, hey, what's the level this week? I was asked, hey, what's the level of effort for this? And I said, well, what's the user experience need to be? Right? You give me a really simple outcome statement, but I don't know anything about what the user experience for that outcome needs to be. And so decomposing these grand ideas into the little tiny stair steps up to that final outcome, that final vision, that I think is a really important skill. And I hope that this chapter specifically aids people in developing that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the chapter and a lot of the questions resonate a lot with the way that we do the work in my organization, at least. And I just wanted to highlight one that comes up a lot in our documentation is the non-goals. To document what is not, you document your goals, and then you actually put in crisp, like what are the things that is not a goal, right? That is not, we're not targeting with. So yeah, I think we're end of the time. I think some people have broke that left. But I want to thank you, Harry, for your time and the other authors and everyone here and Sevi. But I think this was a good chapter, at least for polishing those communication skills, right? Of like answering those questions, breaking down the problem that you mentioned. Like, give me a good user experience, a good output goal. I'll give you an input goal, right? Usually that's the lingo that we I'm a company
Yeah.
with output goals, input goals, um, and documenting to have alignment. Like usually these documents are for alignment, and also for, like Sevi said, for people coming new to the company, finding why people make certain decisions. Why we're using Kubernetes here and not serverless? Why are we using this cloud provider versus that cloud provider? Why are we using this storage solution versus that storage solution? Why are we using the CNI versus that CNI? If you document like how you came to that conclusion, then people can understand why we're doing it this way, instead of you being grumpy about like, I don't like this, I like to use the latest and greatest technology that came out yesterday, right? So thank you so much. I hope that this session was useful. I'll put it on the YouTube list, and then next week we end the book. I hope the authors can join next week, and you also. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for this chapter
Thank you.
as well, folks. Technical depth, I think, appearing in a platform engineering book was very crucial. And yeah, it definitely deserves the space. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank
See
you.
you
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Yes.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Cheers.
weekend. Bye.